begins at Bahia Blanca, 400 miles to Buenos Aires. Begins at a plain with scattered grass and no bushes and trees. He also describes the haziness of Bahia Blanca, but others say how no. But it is because of the fires in and around the area. So after a long gallop to the stream of Rio Sas, which is a deep, rapid 25-foot stream which flows to the head of Port Desire and Rio Chupat, and he describes much about this stream. He also describes how there's highly cellular scoriae, which I looked up, and that is lava. So from there, they head to the Sierra de la Ventana, and that is a visible mountain from where they stand, which is about 3,340 feet. And they climb that, and they're struggling to find water, basically. And they search for the water, and they end up finding it. And they find more lava rock, which he also describes, and lots of quartz throughout the story. So then they spend the night there. September 9th, they ascend the peak, and it's full of rocks and indents, and it's hard to climb. It takes a long time. And then they reach the top to find a valley, even lower than the past one, which makes it even harder to climb. He sees two horses, and then he goes up another peak. He often describes the pebbles and gravel and such that he finds along the way as looking like cement and very descriptive. He goes through more plains, and then they spend the night. And September 10th, they arrive at the Sas Posta, and then they find a great number of deer and a guanaco, which is a llama. Then they head through the plain against the Sierra, and they have to circulate around it to find a pass, and then they end up staying the night at the Posta. September 11th, they reach the third Posta, and they go through another dry and grassy plain, and they see many hills to the left. Next they see 15 soldiers, which at first they thought were soldiers, but actually realize that they're Indians, and he describes them with black hair, naked, and a wild appearance, with cattle and dogs and horses. So September 12th and 13th, he talks about the spear games, and he watches a Salvador Rosa scene, and then he sees a bunch of dead animals. And next, the soldiers and him sleep in a hovel made of thistle stalks. And he watches more soldiers as they scan the horizon, as they hear weird noises. He then sees what he describes 40 to 50 foxes, and says that the dogs killed one. Then they return to the Posta and meet up with two men who killed a puma for hunting and found 27 ostrich eggs. Spend the night there, and September 14th they come upon a swamp. And then September 15th they pass another Posta, and this time they see 5 dead soldiers, and one of the officers he describes to have 18 wounds on his body. Then they reach the 5th Posta, and they come to a rancho with its roof made of thistle stalks once again. And then he sees a bunch of black-winged stilt and pied plover, which he says he sees all over the country. September 16th, they get to the 7th Posta, and it's at Sierra Tapalguin. And then they come to a nice hovel with columns. Next, he sees a lot of fresh hides from dead animals, and he describes this. He says that the reason that they've brought back all these dead animals is because of the hail, which was extremely large and scary from the previous night. And the fence was broken down, which he also describes. So next they cross the Sierra Tapalguin and go over some more hills, which he describes one of the hills as being 100 feet high. And then they stop at Cape Corrientes, and they talk of the hills with remarkable form, and the Corral, which is a hill of 2 to 3 miles in diameter, and it's surrounded by cliffs that are about 30 to 40 feet, and there's only one entrance, which he also describes. September 17th, they follow the course of the Rio Tapalguin, and they reach the ninth posta, and it's in a town actually called the Tapalguin. And then he describes this town as level, except for a bunch of Indian huts. And then he talks about the men as having healthy complexions. They go to another 3 ranchos, and then it's September 18th, and they reach the 12th posta, and they come to Estancia with a bunch of white women and cattle, as he describes. And then they ride through a country flooded with water, and they arrive at Salado, which is a deep stream, and they slept there for the night. September 19th, they passed the Guardia del Monte, and which is a scattered town with little gardens full of peach and quince trees, and then they saw the cardoon and fennel plants. Last day, September 20th, he describes agave hedges, groves of olive and peach and willow trees along the way, or in this town. And then he talks about how beautiful Buenos Aires is, and how the buildings are amazingly beautiful. Then he also discusses the Great Corral and how he sees a horse and a matador.
Bahia Blanca is a very important seaport in Argentina, located in the southwest corner of the Buenos Aires province. The name literally translates to White Bay because of the white sands on the beaches there. It is the largest seaport in Argentina and among the most important there. It is home to approximately 300,000 residents. That's about the same population as Lexington, Kentucky. The area of the city is about 868 square miles, which is comparable to Jacksonville, Florida. Basketball is a very popular sport there, and is a modern city with public transportation, taxis, businesses, all that sort of good stuff, just like any other city. Then Darwin travels to Buenos Aires, which is a much, much larger city. It is the largest city in Argentina. It's the capital of Argentina, and it's the second largest city in South America. Approximately 3 million residents live there. That's between the population of Chicago and Los Angeles. The metro area is about 78.5 square miles, which is comparable to Cincinnati, Ohio. There's a very diverse population in Buenos Aires. The residents there are called porteños, which translates to people of the port. They are all descendants from many, many different kinds of immigrants from all over Europe. including Spanish, Italian, British, Jewish, German, much like it is here in America. Tango originated in Buenos Aires. The prominent language spoken there is Spanish, but it's a different dialect. It's Castilian Spanish. So where we would say me llamo, they go me llamo. It's a little bit different. Sports are really big there, especially soccer, where soccer is basically a religion in Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires is also very diverse economically in their population. You can be walking through a rich city or part of the city and still find thugs and people like that, like people lower income. It's the cultural, educational, economical like center of Argentina. Their economy alone is important for most of Argentina and keeping it going. The president, so to say, of Argentina lives in La Casa Rosada, which, how in America we have the White House, they have the Pink House. And Buenos Aires is a city, like any large city in America. Large skyscrapers, universities, public transportation, buses, taxis, and all the subways. Buenos Aires also has probably the most European influence of any of the Argentinian countries now. It's sometimes referred to as the Paris of South America. It has a lot of dance. Like I said earlier, tango was originated here. And music is very popular here. And so is theater. Much of these sort of things, such as theater, was adopted from European. Also, the architecture around is very European in contrast to more Southern American sort of things. So, in conclusion, if you were to go visit Buenos Aires or Bahia Blanca today, what you would find are two large cities that are very similar to your typical American city. Skyscrapers and a lot of European styled architecture. So not all that different than what we're used to.
Okay, so the main differences between what Darwin saw on his journey in 1831 and what he would see had he gone today between Buenos Aires and Bahia Blanca the first thing he noticed would primarily be this really intense urbanization of Buenos Aires and Bahia Blanca and this huge population increase. And I think Darwin would be curious and interested in what brought about industrialization and how this occurred. And it occurred through industrialization and the creation of the Buenos Aires Great Southern Railway and increased trade and economic productivity. And the second main difference that Darwin would notice would be this really intense decline in Indian presence in the region. I mean, in the reading, Darwin focused on the Indians and their way of life quite a bit. One quote was that, "For till lately neither man, woman, nor horse was safe from the attacks of the Indians." And I feel like he focused on the Indians and how they attacked and all the different things regarding the Indians, and I think he'd be really interested in why their presence decreased so much. And it decreased mainly just because of immigration of Europeans, mainly Spaniards and Italians, and with the growth of population and industrialization, it's not surprising that they become less present, less prominent. And I think the third main difference, at least geographically speaking, that Darwin would notice was introduced species. In the text, he's very interested in why the plains of coarse herbage changed to basically like grassy fields, and that was because of the introduction of cattle. And there have been a ton of introduced species into Tierra del Fuego and Buenos Aires and that region, such as like wild boar, red deer, reindeer, the beaver, American mink, red squirrel, European hare. And I think as a naturalist and as a scientist, Darwin would have been interested in how these introduced invasive species change their environment, and how the environment reacted to these introduced species. I think as a naturalist, it was Darwin's job to observe the environment and different creatures, animals, and determine how animals adapted to their environment and how the environment was impacted by these animals. So I think that these new introduced species would have greatly interested Darwin, and he would have been fascinated to see to have evidence of how time impacted different introduced species. And I think in terms of the landscape, I think he would have been curious as to why certain regions changed the way they have, and how environments have shifted and changed. So I think overall, if Darwin would have gone back, or come forward rather, to the present and seen how things have changed, I think he'd be just incredibly just fascinated and interested. I don't know that he would have viewed introduced species as like a good or bad thing, but I think he would have definitely been curious and fascinated as to why what happened the way it happened. So, yeah.